Market to Market is everywhere you are. Subscribe to Market on YouTube, find us on the PBS video app to stream on demand, and add our 3 podcasts on your favorite podcasting app.
Hey everybody, it's Paul Yeager and welcome inside the MTOM Show podcast home studio. And we are now even in pumpkin form, as 'tis the season to be talking about pumpkins and all sorts of specialty commodities, and that's what we are doing with Tanner Ehmke. He is an economist with CoBank, and he does specialize in a lot of the specialty crops. Specialty, sorry to mix those up like that, so close. But we're going to talk about the knowledge exchange, what CoBank is. We're also going to be talking about some supply issues when it comes to COVID and in the grocery business. So Tanner joins us from Colorado, but we start, as you know, I always have to do, with sports and how Farmageddon makes a special place in his heart and his time in Iowa. If you have any feedback for me, paul.yeager@iowapbs.org. We love it if you like this podcast, share it with a friend, or even give us feedback. Thank you so very much for watching, listening, or reading. And now, here's Tanner. Western Kansas, huh? So does that make you a wildcat, or did you identify with another state, Tanner?
I do bleed purple. I am a Kansas State University Wildcat through and through. Got 2 degrees from there, so I am a Wildcat 100%.
Is Farmageddon real? If I say Farmageddon, do you know what that means?
It is real. K-State and Iowa State. Yeah. Farmageddon, it is real.
And that was just a couple of weeks ago. And I don't think many people always get that joke, but it is. It's funny when you go down to Manhattan because you find out all these Iowa people. And when you go up to Ames, there's all these Kansas people. There's kind of like this trade of sorts.
I remember going to my first Iowa State football game when I was in college. And I was, of course, wearing all my purple. And everyone was very kind and patient with me being in there in the audience. It was
So you came to a game in Ames?
Long time ago, yes. K-State was there playing, and of course we won.
Yeah.
But everyone in Ames was very gracious hosts.
Well, they, there's an understanding of things of, okay, nice, you go first. No, you go first. I mean, it's different if it's a Nebraska fan. I mean, that's just different. So we won't get into that.
No, we won't. Right. Well, they left the park. They decided Big 12 wasn't for them. So
yeah, they just like to travel a little further east now instead of going up to Ames to go to Iowa City. So Tanner, if you in Manhattan for a couple of degrees, how'd you end up in Colorado at CoBank?
Well, I started out at CoBank as the grains analyst and been here ever since. I started in 2015. Then I was manager of the group, and now I've turned my focus to dairy and specialty crops, which is an interesting dynamic. You kind of have to watch what's going on in all the markets because of feed, because of livestock prices, and then specialty crops. There's a whole lot of stuff going on at once. A lot of that is in the coast, especially out in California. But that's where I'm at right now, and we're located in the Denver, Colorado area.
So CoBank, I mean, it gets quoted now. Maybe I'm just hypersensitive to it because I've been seeing it lately. Tell me what CoBank is, because I don't know if everybody is fully on board with it.
CoBank is the largest lender in agriculture in the United States. We're part of the farm credit system. We're a wholesale lender to agricultural the ACAs in our district in the western half of the U.S. And also up in the Northeast. And then we're also the major lender for cooperatives. So your local grain co-op is probably our borrower. So we see all aspects of the agricultural supply chain. From farmers and ranchers through our partners in farm credit, the associations, all the way through agribusiness companies and co-ops.
It sounds, I don't know, clearinghouse for a lot of those. I mean, with a bank, clearinghouse isn't the best term. I mean, it's a bank.
We're a bank, and we're a cooperative bank. We're owned by our members, and so. We're nationwide, except with our ACA partners, which is just within our district in the western half of the U.S., like I said, in the Northeast. But because we have so much exposure to agriculture, it's interesting to see how the supply chains affect all these different parts of agriculture so differently. I mean, we're talking about, of course, grain and farm supply co-ops to, almonds, cranberries, citrus, you name it. We see livestock, animal processing, animal protein. We see everything, dairy. It's been quite a unique, well, for everybody, it's been unique to see over the past year and a half. But we've kind of had that front row seat seeing all this play out. It's been quite unique.
Well, had you ever seen an event like COVID that highlighted so many specialties at one time?
I think that'd be an understatement to say that. I mean, yes, no, excuse me, no, we have not seen anything like this, and I don't think anybody has. From all the stresses that we're seeing at the producer level with, fertilizer and chemical crop protectant issues, with prices going to historical highs if you can get it, all the way through processing, trying to process cattle. For instance, and you're seeing in the refrigerated cold or cold chain, that's a whole issue unto itself. So many aspects from farm to fork have been impacted by these logistics issues and the lack of labor, which is something we've always dealt with in agriculture perpetually over the years. And it just kind of came unfolding all at once. And I think agriculture sees that more so than other aspects of the U.S. economy because we are so labor and transportation intensive. It has really, I think, hit agriculture harder than most sectors.
I remember in the early days of this March, April, May of 2020, there were stories about a oversupply issue. Potatoes, onions, green beans, whatever it was that was growing that was headed for a cruise, an entertainment venue, and all of that. Those were the stories early. Do those stories still exist of an oversupply of something that can't find its way to market?
I would say there's plenty of supply, generally speaking. The problem is trying to get it from point A to point Z. If you look at some of the data with cold storage, for instance, cold storage inventories of animal protein, meat, have been down quite a bit, down 20% year over year. So there is a supply issue there, and that is because you got to go, again, back it up to the supply chain issue. Can you find the workers there to process those animals into the finished product the consumers need at the restaurant or at the grocery store? So I think that is, again, the major issue here. I don't think it's farmers producing too much. It's building up in warehouses because we can't get the truck drivers in place to move it from point A to point Z. And then once you get it to the consumer, you also have to add in the cost of transportation. The cost of fuel is rising. And so that complicates things even further. And so by the time the consumer gets it, the perception is, wow, what are we paying these farmers to do? Well, it's not the farmer who's benefiting or the reason for the cost here. It's all of these numerous links throughout the supply chain have come undone. And there's really no sign that this is going to be resolved anytime soon. And I regret to say, I don't know if there's a lot that policymakers can do about it at this point. There's some things that are being done, like, for instance, Biden helping to resolve things at the port at Long Beach and Los Angeles, going to 24/7 operations to try to resolve the movement of containers. I think that's more of a Band-Aid on a more global problem. And I think in agriculture, we're still dealing with these issues throughout everything, whether you're talking about trying to get fertilizer or crop protectants, all the way to delivering that finished product to the consumer. It's from farm to fork. It's a major problem. Doesn't appear to be going anywhere anytime soon.
Let's go back to your port analogy. Let's say the ship is part A, getting it onto land is B. It now sounds like from B to C, from that warehouse in, say, Long Beach to the next spot. I mean, we're short truckers. We were short truckers before we went in. The industry, though, before COVID, was already struggling with an image problem of labor treatment. I mean, you'd see the stories on 60 Minutes or wherever of, this couple trucked together and they lost everything because the industry has told me that they have addressed some of those issues. Is it going to take more by the industry itself? If you're saying the government may not have the answers, it's going to have to be certain industries that change some ways of doing business?
I think, Paul, the answer is going to come down to a couple of things. One, what are you willing to pay a worker? What is the market willing to bear there to keep workers in the workforce? And we can talk about that a moment. But I think as long as we're dealing with elevated wages across the economy, but especially in agriculture, that's going to make automation a lot more appealing. Prior to COVID, a lot of technologies did not make financial sense. Well, let's say, for instance, you went from paying a worker $15 an hour to paying them $20 or perhaps even $25 an hour. Now, payments or leasing new machines or new technology starts to be more competitive. And so I think over the short term here, there's going to be a lot of work done throughout the supply chain to find those answers of what makes financial sense. And over the long term, we're going to eventually resolve the supply chain issues. But these type of things don't happen overnight. They don't happen. They're not going to happen next week or next month. And when you talk to a lot of labor economists out there, given the nature of where we're at with the labor supply nationwide, it's not going to be this year. It's not going to be 2021. We see a resolution to these issues. It's going to be more like 2022 or even beyond, because so many people have permanently left the workforce. And are some of those people going to come back at these current wages, if we see higher wages later on persist? Perhaps there will be some people who decide that they don't want to be retired. Maybe they get tired of living on a golf course every day. I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of those people, but some people may decide to come back to the workforce, and rather than taking that early retirement they were forced into. Or perhaps there may be a lot of people who started their own business over the past 18 months who decide perhaps that's too much risk for them, too many hours in the week, and perhaps they might want to go back to something more regular. But I think it's going to take some extraordinary wages to convince a lot of those people to come back and be truckers, or to be working in a pack house, for instance, standing on their feet all day long in chilly room temperatures, wearing PPE gear. That's hard work. It's not enjoyable. And I think for the most part, it's going to take automation and persistent high wages to really resolve these issues.
You mentioned the people leaving the workforce. I mean, the charts of those who've started their own business has been very, very high in comparison to year over year levels going back to at least '08, if not before. So if you have more people that are wanting to work for themselves, maybe they were already thinking about it, but this pandemic really accelerated a lot of things. That's one of them. And you mentioned automation at facilities. That might be one of the other ones. Even in the trucking industry, they've pushed automation of auto truckers. So I guess I ask, is this supply issue more of a supply, the part itself, the labor, or is it a combination of the two?
I think a lot of it's going to come down to labor. Do you have the people there to move it from point A to point Z? And we don't. You mentioned earlier, Paul, that we were dealing with a shortage of truckers coming into the pandemic. I think we were short about 70,000 long-haul truckers pre-pandemic. And I don't know what the number is now, but it's a lot worse than that. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these delays. And that's a hard life living on the road. A lot of people being away from their families for an extended period of time. And if they were sent home for several weeks at a time, and I think they got used to that. They started thinking, you know what, I kind of like being at home with my family for once. And so perhaps started looking for other work. And that's why so many people, truckers and non-truckers, a lot of people decided they're going to take a stab at running their own company. We'll see how well. We'll see how many of those people, last through that. I think a lot of people are going to realize that maybe there's more security working for somebody else. But I think we're not going to get everybody back. There's going to be a lot of people who will have found out they really do like that flexibility of being their own boss.
Or working in their, in sweatpants. I mean, there's something to be said about employee. I mean, look at the employers. Let's go back even 5-10 years. Those places that were celebrated as, oh, this is the new workplace. Sounds a lot like working out of your house. There's a couch, there's a ping pong table, there's, food or whatever it is. The worker all of a sudden has a little bit of leverage in this. I mean, do you see, you mentioned higher wages. Is that the only thing we're talking about is money and wages?
It's going to come down to availability. If we can't find the workers domestically, we're going to look overseas. And I think we've got some concerning news there as well. If you look at H-2A visa issuances from Mexico, our number one place, over 90% of our agricultural workers come from Mexico. Those are down as well, down sharply. Same thing there. Mexican citizens have done the math as well. They said, you know what, why should I live in the United States on an H-2A visa, being away from my family for several months at a time and sending those remittances back to Mexico? Why don't I just find a job right here in Mexico? It may pay less, or perhaps it may even pay more if it's in a different sector, if they go from agriculture to manufacturing or construction. So I think we have those pressures to contend with as well. It's not just finding workers here domestically and trying to convince domestic workers to come back at higher wages and sacrificing autonomy at home to have a higher income, perhaps. It's also, can we attract those foreign workers? And I think it's going to be a tight labor situation on both sides. And this is really going to impact a lot of producers, whether you're talking specialty crops or dairy or animal protein. It's going to be all of those labor intensive sectors going to be really struggling with there.
And it's going to be a lot of countries. I did have a note about, I wanted to talk about domestic or international labor or supply issues. This is not just the United States. You've already mentioned Mexico. Yes. We're seeing in Europe, we're seeing worker challenges in China. I mean, this global workforce challenge is not just isolated to a couple of places, right?
It's global. Absolutely, Paul. It is a global issue because everyone had time to sit at home and contemplate their lives. And a lot of people around the world said, you know what, I don't like my job. I'm going to go do something else. And so it's not America only. It is global.
Mm-hmm. All right. One of the things when we sat at home, we altered the way we do lots of things. One of them is eat. The restaurant industry has suffered from, the restaurant industry had to pivot. The food industry had to pivot from all these restaurant meals to these in-home meals. The grocery stores were overwhelmed trying to figure out, I don't have enough of this product. How did you notice in some of your work, whether it is some of those specialty crops that you mentioned that were able to fill gaps, or maybe it was packaging differences in grocery store? What's your take on how the grocery industry has had to pivot for what they put on the shelves in all of this?
Well, remember back where we were a little over a year ago, we had empty store shelves. There was a run on supplies. And so the industry had to realign very quickly, trying to get product in there. That was a huge demand on packaging, whether it's cans or cardboard, you name it, anything that was required there to reroute product from a restaurant to put it on a grocery store shelf required a lot of people trying to reinvent the wheel almost in short order. And as a result, what the grocery industry has done is they've become very smart, or a lot smarter about delivering product to consumers on the shelf. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that everything is back to normal. I don't think there will ever be a return to normal. If you look at what's going on with restaurant sales, for instance, we've had a non-seasonal, we'll say, spike in animal protein demand. And our animal protein economist, Brian Ernest here at CoBank, has done some great work there analyzing what's going on. And it's really interesting to see these new consumer behaviors. Yes, they want to have that access to the grocery store, and having food delivered to their home. But they're also itching to get out and spend some of this money that they've been saving. We're sitting on over $2 trillion in consumer savings after the pandemic. And I say after, we got to be careful about that. But they want to experience some level of normalcy. And so that's why we've seen phenomenal restaurant sales that you typically wouldn't see like we've seen in the last quarter. Consumers want to have that restaurant experience and they're eating steaks like they haven't had before. It's not typical for sales to be on retail for Q3 sales to be as high as they were. So I think there's some behaviors here that are going to be new, that are going to be continually evolving in this dance between grocery and retail and restaurant demand. So it'll be an evolving picture going forward. But I think the consumer is striving for that normalcy, but at the same time, a lot of them learned how to click and collect on their groceries, and that behavior is not going away.
I agree. And I think what we make and how we make and who we share that food with is different. The meal sharing experience is changed a lot of things. I'll give you that. As we get close to the end here, I guess I just want to ask, is there anybody that's going to benefit in all of this? I know it's a weird, wild question, but I mean, are there certain products, certain groups of people? I mean, we talk about maybe the worker benefits. I don't know.
There's definitely leverage to the worker in this time of change. If you are a manual laborer, you've got bargaining power. You're seeing workers at Packers, for instance, getting paid $25 an hour, just phenomenal wages. You're seeing farm workers, truck drivers, they've got bargaining power. They're going to be in a much advantaged position. Now, we have to be careful about how we talk about that, because remember, although people's wages are rising and they have bargaining power, remember their costs are going up too. The cost of paying rent goes up. The cost of feeding their family is going up. So we need to also keep that in mind for these working families. But they are benefiting from more bargaining power, absolutely. And then there are some people in the supply chain, for instance, Packers right now are experiencing historic packing margins. So they have benefited too.
That's a whole nother podcast for another hour, so we can talk about packer margins. I like to ask a magic wand type question. Once we fill, maybe we don't. Once we get this worker issue addressed and things start getting to their destinations, what's going to be the next step that's going to need addressing here with a magic wand?
I would say our international trade issues are going to come back again because a lot of our agricultural supply chain actors, let's just say our processors, what have you, are concerned about the long term, about their market share overseas. They're losing market share because of these logistical issues. And so they are, for the most part, wanting to keep operations in the United States if possible. But the longer these supply chain issues persist, they're going to be forced to evaluate moving some operations overseas. Now, logistics are a big part of that, but at the same time as well, we have not renegotiated the tariffs and the retaliatory tariffs that we had under Trump, and that is going to be back on the table. It has to be if we want to be competitive in the global marketplace. So I'd say. Again, being careful about using the words post-pandemic, but let's say at some point after we get a lot of these supply chain issues worked out, however long that is, trade internationally is going to be back on the table, and we can't step away from that. We have to keep our mind on where we are long-term with maintaining our market share and growing our exports.
Well, it took several months, but the new U.S. trade rep said, with China specifically, we're going to continue on the path that we have. We might relax some tariffs, but we're going to keep what's there, which was an interesting, and I asked the Secretary of Agriculture about that just last week. And, he's like, well, that's where we're going to go. So it seemed like the Trump White House provided some coverage of going hard after China. We'll see if there's still an appetite for it moving forward. Do you think there is globally after China?
I think globally, the world's got their hands full with a lot of things, and perhaps trade negotiations are not the most pressing issue. We've got still a pandemic that people are dealing with in various levels around the country. You've got other things going on that will push down tariff negotiations and what have you down the list, unfortunately. But over time, I think these issues will be elevated once we get past a lot of these supply chain issues and perhaps some concern or some of the issues relating to COVID and COVID variants. Then some of these trade negotiations can come back again, hopefully. But I think policymakers have their hands full with other things, unfortunately.
All right, Tanner, you mentioned you cover and look at a lot of specialty crops. Is there a specialty crop that's quietly had a pretty good year?
I would say that despite all of the logistical issues, tree nuts had a phenomenal year. Tree nut producers grew a record-sized crop last year of almonds and pistachios and walnuts. And it was a banner year on exports. They would have done even better had we not had the logistical issues. And I think they've done quite well despite all the global issues. But now we are dealing with a historic drought, unfortunately, and so that changes the picture, unfortunately, for a lot of the specialty crop sector. Mm-hmm. But in terms of exports, tree nuts did very, very well.
All right, Tanner, we could keep talking, but we need to move on to the next topic. Tanner Ehmke, thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you.
That will do it for this installment of the MTOM Show podcast. If you have feedback for me, hit me up, market2market@iowapbs.org. Next time, we'll drop a new episode on Tuesday. You never know who we're going to talk to. If you have any comments, leave them. Love to read them. Instead, for now, just enjoy the fall season with our pumpkins.